Mara Leon Vale stood in the Briar Crossing Courthouse with every future she had earned being stripped from her in front of the whole town. One minute, she was the quiet translator, trusted to carry a dying ranch hand's Spanish testimony into English. The next, three respected men were calling her a liar, a thief, and a woman who had sold innocent words for blood money. The school board turned its face away. Her promised clerkship vanished. Even the man who had once asked to walk beside her looked down at his boots and said nothing. But at the back of the room, Rancher Elias Ward noticed one thing nobody else did. The man shaming Myra went pale when she mentioned the old road. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The courthouse in Briar Crossing always smelled of dust, ink, and damp wool, even in the dry months. On that October morning, the room was packed so tight that latecomers stood in the doorway with their hats pressed to their chests, pretending they had come for justice and not gossip. Outside, wagons lined the street in front of the mercantile. Horses stamped at the hitching rails. A train whistle cried from the depot at the far end of town, thin and lonely against the prairie wind. The church bell had rung 9 times, and by the 10th stroke, everybody they were there. The county was hearing testimony about Cedar Road. It was supposed to be a public road, a simple road, a road that would connect Briar Crossing to the new freight line and bring money to the town. But no road in the West was ever only a road. It meant whose land would be crossed, whose pasture would be split, whose well would become public, whose home would suddenly stand in the way of progress. Mara Leon Vale sat near the witness chair with a brown satchel in her lap and her hands folded over the buckle. She was 26, slight of build, with black hair pinned simply beneath a gray bonnet. Her mother had been from Canton and had learned English over laundry tubs and railroad campfires. Her father had been a surveyor from Missouri, a man who believed maps were promises made with ink. Between them, Mara had inherited gift for listening, Spanish from the vaqueros who had boarded at her mother's washhouse, Cantonese from lullabies and kitchen arguments, English from her father's books and the courthouse papers she had copied since she was 15. She never raised her voice. She never had to. Men who spoke loudly often missed the truth because it came quietly. That morning, truth came from a wounded old ranch hand named Tomas Serrano. He had worked the southern range for 30 years and knew the old freight tracks better than any man alive. His left arm was bound in a sling from a fall, and his face was gray with fever. But he had insisted on speaking. Mara listened as he gave his words in Spanish. Then she turned to Judge Whitcomb and translated. "Mr. Serrano says the old Cedar Road does not run through the Ward Spring. It bends east by the cottonwoods and crosses at the dry wash. He says the county map shown today is not the road he traveled. It's a new road drawn over an old name." A murmur moved through the room. At the front table, Pike Avery, chairman of the road committee, adjusted his gold watch chain and smiled like a man who had expected trouble. Beside him sat Lyle Carver, the banker, broad-faced and red at the neck, and Harlan Bell, a young attorney with a clean collar and eyes too careful to be kind. Harlan had once brought Myra a paper-wrapped book of poems and told her she deserved more than the narrow desk beneath the courthouse stairs. He had asked if, after the clerkship was approved, she might consider a future with him. Mara had not said yes, but she had let herself imagine a little room with lace curtains, a shelf of books, and a life where her voice mattered. That hope was sitting across from her now, refusing to meet her eyes. Pike Avery stood. "Your Honor, I must object to this translation." The judge frowned. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Miss Vale has changed material meaning before this court." The room went still. Mara felt the satchel buckle press into her palm. "I translated his words exactly." Lyle Carver rose with a folded paper in his hand. "We have reason to believe otherwise." He passed the paper to the judge. Mara recognized the shape of it before she saw the writing. It was a copy of the county map statement, but the marks were wrong. The Spanish line beneath Tomas Serrano's name said he agrees Cedar Road crossed Ward Spring. Tomas saw it and shook his head sharply. No, DJ Eso. Mara translated before she could stop herself. He says he did not say that. A woman near the back whispered. How convenient. Another answered. Her mother took in railroad men. Didn't she? The judge tapped the bench. Order. Pike Avery's voice softened, which made it more dangerous. Miss Vale is a clever young woman. Too clever, some say. She speaks tongues most of us cannot check. She has had access to every testimony, every ledger in this courthouse. And now, when this town stands at the edge of prosperity, she asks us to believe every official document is false, except the words she alone can give us. Mara stood. Her knees felt weak, but her voice did not. The official document is false. Gasps came from the benches. Harlan closed his eyes as if she had embarrassed him. Lyle Carver turned to the crowd. There, you hear it. The girl accuses the county to save herself. I accuse no one to save myself, Mara said. I am telling the court that the road line has been altered. Pike Avery shook his head sadly. A woman's ambition can run faster than her judgment. That was the sentence that broke the room open. The school board president, Mrs. Truitt, rose from the second bench and said the board would delay Mara's appointment until the matter was settled. The county clerk removed her name from the list of candidates without looking at her. Judge Whitcomb suspended her from translation work pending inquiry. And Harlan Bell, who had once spoken of curtains and books, folded his hands and said, I cannot attach my name to scandal. Mara did not cry. That seemed to disappoint the crowd. She gathered her satchel, bowed once to the judge because habit was stronger than humiliation, and walked down the aisle past faces that had eaten her mother's bread, hired her father for service, and sent for Mara when a letter arrived in a language they could not read. Near the back wall stood Elias Ward. He was a tall rancher with sun-browned skin, broad shoulders, and a scar along his jaw that made his quietness look severe. He owned 3 Lantern Ranch west of town, though most folks knew him more by absence than presence. He came in for supplies, paid cash, spoke little, and left before saloon talk softened his name into rumor. Mara passed him without lifting her eyes. But Elias saw what others did not. He saw Pike Avery's hand tremble when Mara mentioned the old road. He saw Lyle Carver reach for the breast pocket where men kept private papers. He saw Harlan Bell look just once toward the missing ledger shelf before he spoke. And he saw Mara step out of the courthouse with her back straight, while the town threw shame after her like stones. On the boardwalk, the wind caught her bonnet strings. Dust lifted around her boots. Someone behind her laughed low. She kept walking. At the corner by the apothecary, a little girl who had once come to Mara for reading lessons held out a primer, then pulled it back when her mother touched her shoulder. That small movement nearly undid her. Mara crossed toward the boarding house, every window in town seeming to watch. Her future had not ended with a gunshot or a fire. It had ended with polite voices, folded papers, and men who smiled while they buried her. By dusk, Briar Crossing had swallowed the story and made it meaner. In the saloon, they said she had been paid by Elias Ward to move the road away from his spring. At the Mercantile, they said she had stolen the ledger to hide her crime. At the church steps, they said a woman raised around foreign tongues could not be expected to respect plain truth. Mara locked herself in her narrow room above Mrs. Beck's boarding house and sat beside the window until the lamps along Main Street blurred in the dust. Then near midnight, she heard footsteps stop outside her door. A man whispered, "Search quiet. Avery says the tin box is here." Mara's hand went cold. The tin box was under the loose floorboard beneath her bed. Inside were her father's survey notes, a burned scrap of map, and a letter he had written before his death, warning that men would one day try to put a new road under an old name. She lifted the satchel from the chair, slid the tin box inside, and opened the window just as the latch on her door began to turn. The roof outside Mara's window sloped toward the alley behind the boarding house. She had climbed it once at 16 to rescue Mrs. Beck's runaway cat. That memory returned to her with cruel clarity as she eased herself over the sill in the cold dark, the satchel strap cutting across her shoulder. Inside the room, wood cracked. Someone had forced the door. Mara crouched low and moved along the roof line, her skirt catching on a nail. Below, the alley smelled of rain barrels, coal ash, and old straw. A horse shifted near the stable, and somewhere in town a drunk man sang half a hymn before forgetting the rest. She lowered herself to the water barrel, slipped, and hit the ground hard enough to steal the breath from her lungs. Above her, a man cursed. Window. Mara ran. She did not run toward the deep hall. That would be watched. She did not run toward the church. That would be locked. She ran toward the wagon yard, where freight teams stood under canvas and the ground was churned soft by wheels. She had nearly reached the blacksmith shop when a hand came from the shadow and caught her arm. Mara twisted with a gasp. "Quiet," said Elias Ward. She struck his chest with the heel of her hand anyway. He let go at once. "I'm not with them. You followed me. I followed them." That was not much comfort, but the sound of boots entering the alley behind her made argument a luxury. Elias took her satchel, not to steal it, but to lighten her, then pointed toward his wagon under the cottonwood. "Get in. I can manage. Not if there are 3 of them, and 1 of you." Pride told her to refuse. Fear told her pride could get a woman killed. Mara climbed into the wagon and ducked beneath a canvas tarp that smelled of flour sacks and leather. Elias moved without hurry, which made him look less suspicious, and led the team out toward the west road, as though midnight errands were a common thing. At the edge of town, a rider crossed behind them. Then another. Elias did not look back. "Stay down," Mara whispered. "They want my father's papers." I figured. How? Men don't break doors for gossip. The wagon rolled past the last lanterns of Briar Crossing and into open prairie. Moonlight silvered the road. The wind moved through the dry grass like a hand over cloth. Only when the town was a low smear behind them did Elias pull the wagon beneath a stand of cottonwoods and give Mara back her satchel. "You can step down if you want," he said. "I won't hold you." Mara climbed from the wagon, stiff and angry and shaking. "Where are you taking me?" "Three Lantern Ranch." "No, all right." That simple answer confused her. Elias leaned against the wagon wheel. "You can go north to the stage road, but Avery keeps riders there. You can go east to the depot, but if they have money enough to move a county ledger, they have money enough to ask who boards a train. You can go south, but there's no water for 20 miles unless you know the well. And west is my ranch." Mara tightened her grip on the satchel. "The whole town thinks you paid me to lie. I know." "Did you?" "No." "Then why help me?" His eyes lifted hers. In the moonlight, they looked gray and tired. "Because Tomas Serrano worked for my father before he worked for anyone else. Because he knows that road. Because when you translated him, Pike Avery looked like a man who heard a coffin lid open." Mara wanted not to trust him. It would have been safer. "You do not like courthouse translators," she said. "No." The answer stung because it was honest. "My brother lost land after a hearing 10 years ago," Elias said. A German widow testified about a boundary stone. By the time her words came through the court, the stone had moved half a mile on paper. "My brother fought it, drank over it, and died bitter. I blamed every desk in that courthouse for a long while. And now I blame men who profit from confusion." Mara looked back toward town. "I did not change Tomas' words. I heard what I heard. That is not the same as believing me, no, Elias said. It's a beginning. They reached Three Lantern Ranch just before dawn. The name came from 3 iron lanterns hanging over the main gate. Each one kept filled no matter the weather. Elias's mother had started the custom when his father rode night range, and Elias had kept it after everyone else stopped needing the signal. The ranch house was plain but strong, built of timber and stone, with a deep porch facing east. Beyond it lay corrals, a barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and pasture, rolling dark against the first pale line of morning. Horses lifted their heads as the wagon entered. A dog once recognized Elias and wagged instead. A man stepped from the bunkhouse with a rifle. Easy, Joaquin, Elias called. It's me. The man lowered the gun. He was older, with a silver mustache and careful eyes. His gaze moved to Mara, then to the satchel. Elias said, Miss Vale needs a safe place till morning. Joaquin answered in Spanish, asking if trouble had followed. Mara, tired beyond caution, replied in Spanish that trouble had followed before she even left town. Joaquin's eyebrows rose. Elias looked between them. He's been trying to tell me something about his brother's letter all week. I caught my bibe 1 word in 3. You have Spanish-speaking men and no translator. I had Thomas. The mention of the old ranch hand settled among them. Inside the house, Elias gave Mara his mother's old room, a small chamber with a quilt folded at the foot of the bed and a basin pitcher painted with blue flowers. There was no lock on the door. He noticed it. I'll sleep in the chair by the kitchen stove, he said. No one comes down that hall without crossing me first. Mara should have thanked him. Instead, she said, I am not your charity, no. He said, You're a witness. The words steadied her. That morning, she slept only 2 hours. When she woke, sunlight lay across the quilt and the ranch was alive with work. Hammers struck in the yard. A horse blew in the corral. Men called to one another in English and Spanish, their voices carrying over the dry wind. On the washstand, Elias had left coffee, bread, and a note written in a square hand. Joaquin's letter is on the kitchen table. Read it only if you choose. Mara stood for a long while with the note in her hand. Then she washed her face, pinned her hair, and went to the kitchen. The letter was from Joaquin's younger brother, Rafael, who had taken work raiding the new road east of Cedar Wash. The Spanish was hurried, the ink smudged, but the meaning was clear. They are not building where they told the town. They are cutting toward Ward Spring. Men are being paid to sign names they cannot read. Tell Elias the old road is being stolen. Tell the quiet lady at the courthouse that her father was right. Mara read the last line twice. Elias watched from the doorway but did not step in. My father, she whispered. Joaquin crossed himself, and for the first time since the courthouse, Mara understood that the shame thrown at her had not been the whole attack. It had only been the cover for something already moving. Ranch life did not wait for grief. By mid-morning, Elias was in the south corral with a black mare that had torn her flank on loose wire. Joaquin was sending 2 boys to check the creek fence. Miss S. Nellie Pritch, who came 3 days a week to cook and scold, placed biscuits on the table as if feeding fugitives were a normal chore, then told Mara she was too thin to survive a strong wind. Mara had spent years in a courthouse where work came in paper stacks, measured by ink and signatures. At Three Lantern, work breathed, kicked, bled, broke, and near. Doing discernas, patifus, finita, doing before a person was ready. Nobody asked if her reputation was ruined before handing her a bucket. Nobody paused to gossip when a calf bawled from behind the hay shed. That first day, she translated Joaquin's letter aloud for Elias and the ranch hands. Some were Anglo, some Mexican, one a quiet Chinese cook named Mr. Fong, who had known Mara mother years before at a railroad camp. The men listened with growing anger as the words described false contracts, shifted markers, and road crews paid from county fund to carve a new route under the old Cedar name. Elias said little. He took the letter, folded it carefully, and put it in his vest. "We need Raphael," he said. Joaquin's face tightened. "Yeptin, Mercerer." The letter mentions a camp near Split Rock. "That's a half-day ride," Elias said. "Then someone should go. Someone will." She heard what he did not say. "Not you." Mara felt heat rise in her face. "I know the language in that camp. I know what to ask. You also have men hunting your satchel." "I had men hunting my satchel in town. Here I only have men deciding for me." The kitchen went quiet. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he nodded once. "Fair." They did not leave at once. A storm was building on the western line, and the ranch had to be secured before anyone rode. Mara found herself carrying rope, holding a lantern while Elias repaired a stall latch, and translating between Joaquin and a young hand named Silas, who kept misunderstanding which gate needed bracing. Silas grinned when the matter was settled. "Guess words can move cattle after all." Mara almost smiled. In the barn, rain began ticking against the roof. Elias climbed down from the ladder, his sleeve torn at the cuff. Without thinking, Mara took a needle from the small case in her satchel and mended it while he held still. "My mother did that," he said. "Mended sleeves?" "Mended while angry." "I am not angry. You sew like the cloth insulted you." This time, she did smile, but only a little. The storm broke hard by afternoon. Rain hammered the barn roofs, turning dust to dark mud and filling the yard with the smell of wet earth. A rider came through it near sundown, bent low over his horse. It was Raphael. He slid from the saddle, half conscious, his shirt stained with blood near the ribs. Joaquin caught him before he fell. The men carried him into the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Pritch sent a boy racing for Doc Hensley. Raphael spoke in broken bursts. Spanish first, then a few English words, then names. Avery, Carver, Bell, ledger burned, road markers changed, men paid, witnesses threatened. Mara stood beside the cot and translated each piece as it came, forcing herself not to soften the fear in his voice. Elias listened with his hat in his hands. When Doc Hensley arrived, he needed questions answered fast. Where was the pain? How deep had the knife gone? Had Raphael coughed blood? Was the blade clean? Raphael's words slurred and tangled with fever. But Mara stayed beside him, translating, repeating, calming Joaquin. When his brother cried out, Elias watched her work, not the graceful work town ladies approved of. Not piano playing, not embroidery for a hope chest, not polite conversation after church. This was work with blood on the sheets and thunder over the roof. Work that held a man's life by the thread of understanding. After midnight, Doc Hensley stepped onto the porch and said, Raphael might live if infection did not take him. Joaquin sat down hard on the bench, covered his face, and wept without sound. Mara went to the kitchen pump to wash blood from her hands. The water was cold enough to hurt. She scrubbed until her skin reddened, but still saw red in the lines of her palm. Elias came in quietly. You saved him time, he said. Might be his life. The doctor saved him. The doctor needed his words. Mara dried her hands on a flour sack. Words are easy to blame when powerful men dislike what they say. Elias leaned against the doorframe. My brother's hearing, the one I told you about. She looked at him. I blamed the translator because it was simpler than blaming myself. I was 21. My father was dead. Eli asked me to ride with him to court, but I stayed to move cattle because the herd mattered more that day. By the time I came in, the papers were signed, and he was half mad with it. I told myself if the words had been right, he'd have kept the land. Maybe that's true, maybe not, But I put 10 years of bitterness on a stranger's tongue because mine didn't know how to say I failed him. Mara stood still. It was not an apology wrapped in flowers. It was better. It cost him something. My father used to say maps do not lie, she said. Only men holding pens do. Elias nodded. Your father wrote that note? Mara looked toward the room where her satchel lay hidden beneath the bed. Before he died, he began to suspect the county wanted to revive Cedar Road. He said the original route protected the spring and the homestead well. Then he was thrown from a horse while surveying near Split Rock. Thrown? That is what they told us. Elias' face changed, not with surprise, with recognition. What did they tell you? Mara asked. That your father had been drinking. Mara's mouth tightened. My father would not drink while carrying instruments. No, Elias said softly. A surveyor wouldn't. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains. The next morning, Elias brought Mara a pair of riding boots that had belonged to his sister. They were too large, but he had stuffed the toes with wool and oiled the leather. Split Rock is rough ground, he said. You are letting me go. I'm asking if you still want to. Mara looked at the boots, then at him. Trust did not arrive like sunrise all at once. It came like lantern light, small and carried by hand. Yes, she said. I do. They rode for Split Rock under a sky washed clean by rain. The prairie shone in patches where puddles caught the light, and meadowlarks called from fence posts as if the world had not spent the night confessing danger. Elias rode ahead on a bay gelding named Moses. Mara followed on a steady roan mare, her borrowed boots set firmly in the stirrups. Rokin stayed behind with Raffle, but he had drawn them a rough map to the grading camp. The old cedar road appeared and disappeared as they traveled. In some places it was nothing more than two shallow ruts through buffalo grass. In others, stones lined the edge, half buried and gray with age. Mara remembered her father's hands drawing similar lines by lamplight, his pencil tapping each curve. A road should follow need, he had told her, not greet. Near noon, they found the first false marker. It stood by a cottonwood, freshly painted white, stamped with the county brand. Elias dismounted and scraped the dirt at its base with his knife. The post had been planted recently. No weathering, no root settle, no sign it belonged to the old road. Mara opened her satchel and took out her father's survey notes. The paper was worn soft at the folds. She compared the landmark descriptions, her lips moving silently as she read. This is wrong, she said. The true marker should be 200 yards east, near a split cedar stump. They found the stump buried under brush. They also found a scrap of red leather caught beneath a stone. It matched the missing courthouse ledger's binding. Elias held it in his palm. Burn, Mara knelt. Beneath the brush lay ashes, paper flakes, and a warped brass corner piece. Whoever had taken the ledger had burned it here, thinking rain would finish what fire began. Mara sifted gently through the ashes with a stick. Most of the pages were gone, but beneath the brass corner, protected by mud, was a half-burned strip of paper with Spanish writing on one side, and her father's tight survey hand on the other. She read it aloud. Original Cedar Road bends east at Split Rock to avoid Ward Spring and the community wells. Any westward alteration will constitute a new road requiring public consent. Elias let out a long breath. It was not enough by itself. A burned scrap could be challenged, but it proved the ledger had existed. It proved the line had been altered, and it connected her father's old warning to the county's present lie. Hoofbeats sounded beyond the ridge. Elias closed his hand over the scrap. Mount. They rode into a draw thick with rabbit brush as three riders appeared on the slope above the burned site. Mara recognized Harlan Bell by the pale band of his hat. One of the men with him dismounted and kicked through the ashes. Harlan's voice carried. They were here, another man said. Avery told you to watch the girl, not court her. I did watch her. Harlan snapped. Mara's face went cold. Elias' jaw tightened, but he did not move. The third rider, a deputy named Krask who was known to drink on Carver's account, spat into the mud. If Ward has the paper, we take him same as the ledger, Fallon said. No killing unless there's no choice. Avery wants this clean. The deputy laughed. Nothing about this is clean. The men rode towards Split Rock Camp. Mara and Elias waited until the sound faded. Then Elias turned his horse toward a narrow cattle trail. We go back, he said. No, Raphael said there are workers at the camp who signed papers they could not read. We need them. We also need you alive. Yes, we go back with one burned scrap. Pike Avery will call it another trick. If we bring men who were cheated, he has to answer. Elias looked toward the ridge. You argue like a lawyer. I translate for lawyers. I know where they hide. They reached the grading camp late in the afternoon. It lay along a scar cut into the earth where men had begun leveling ground for the false road. Tents leaned in the wind. Mules stood hip-shot by a water wagon. The workers were tired, mud-caked men, mostly Mexican and Chinese, with a few poor homesteaders who had signed on for day wages. At first, they would not speak. Fear had closed them tighter than any lock, but Mara stood beside the cook fire and told them who she was. She told them Raphael lived. She told them the county had used their names. A Chinese worker named Han produced a paper from inside his coat. Mr. Fong's cousin, he said in Cantonese. He had thought it a pay agreement. It was a sworn statement that he had witnessed the road marker at Ward Spring. Then a Mexican grader named Luis showed his copy. Then another man. Then another. All the statements bore marks made by men who had not understood the English above them. Mara copied names until her fingers cramped. Elias kept watch at the edge of camp but once. When a young worker hesitated, Elias removed his hat and said, No man here will be left alone for telling truth. That mattered. Not because he was the loudest man, because he was the one whose land was at stake. And still, he spoke first for theirs. They left at dusk with 6 signed statements, 2 marked copies and handwriting with them as witness. They did not reach the ranch before Holland did. His buggy stood in the yard when they returned, its wheels sunk in mud. Mrs. Pritch waited on the porch with a shotgun across her lap, and an expression that suggested she had hoped someone would give her a reason. Harlan stood near the gate, hat in hand, looking offended by the weapon. Mara, he said, as if they were meeting after church. I came to help you. Elias dismounted slowly. You brought a deputy for her protection. Mara saw Deputy Krask near the barn, pretending to examine a saddle while watching the house. Harlan stepped closer. You do not understand what you are caught in. Avery and Carver are powerful men. They can ruin you beyond Briar Crossing. They can make sure no school, no court, no decent family will ever take your name. But if you return with me tonight and state that grief over your father confused your translation, the matter can be softened. Yes, he lowered his voice. I will still marry you. The words landed like dirty water. Elias looked away, giving her the dignity of answering for herself. Mara said, You testified against me. I told what I had to tell. You opened the record room for me, then called it suspicious. To save the road. Harlan's face hardened for the first time. You have always thought your cleverness placed you above consequence. I have spent my life carrying other people's meaning carefully, because men like you wait for one dropped word to call a woman careless. He reached for her arm. Elias moved one step. No more. Harlan froze. Mara did not step back. Tell Pike Avery the quiet girl from the courthouse is finished being useful. Deputy Krask shifted near the barn. Mrs. Pritch cocked the shotgun. The deputy stopped shifting. Harlan smiled without warmth. Then you should know this. By morning, a warrant will be issued for your arrest on theft of county property. Word, will be charged with harboring you. Every witness you found will be called a liar paid from his pocket. And by next week, Cedar Road will be approved. He put on his hat. You cannot outrun the law, he said. Elias answered, maybe not, but we can reach the right one. Harlan's smile faltered. Mara saw it. So did Elias. There was one man Pike Avery did not control. Territorial Judge Samuel Crane, arriving at Fort Laramie Junction in 2 days to hear railroad disputes. If they could place the evidence before him, the county hearing would no longer be the final word. But the only way to reach the junction before Avery's men was the road. The true old Cedar Road. They prepared through the night. No lamps were lit in the front windows. In the barn, Elias spread maps across a feed bin, while Mara laid her father's notes beside them. Hans sat nearby, sipping coffee from both hands. Shokin, pale with worry but steady, joined them after Raphael's fever eased. Mrs. Pritch packed biscuits, coffee, jerky, and a jar of peach preserves she claimed were medicinal. The plan was simple in the way dangerous plans often are. At first light, Elia and Han would take the old Cedar Road through Split Rock, cross the dry wash, and cut north toward Fort Laramie Junction. Joaquin would ride to neighboring homesteads and gather anyone whose name had been forged or land threatened. Mrs. Pritch would send Doc Hensley to town with word that Raphael was alive and ready to testify. Mara listened as they spoke, but part of her remained with the warrant. Harlan had promised. Theft, fraud, harboring, words that could turn help into crime. Elias noticed her silence. On the porch, while the others worked, she found her standing beneath the 3 lanterns at the gates. Their flames bent in the wind but did not go out. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I am used to poor judgment. She looked at the road, silver under the moon. If you ride with me tomorrow, they will say every lie from the courthouse was true. They already do. They will say I was kept here. I know what they'll say. Your ranch depends on contracts. Credit? Neighbors. A man alone can survive gossip. A ranch cannot. Elias leaned his shoulder against the gatepost. A ranch also cannot survive if its spring is stolen. This is not only about your spring. No, he said. It stopped being only about that when they broke your door. The wind moved between them. Mara said, I had a life plan. A small one, perhaps, but mine. Clerkship, a room, books. My bibe, respect if I worked twice as hard and never frightened anyone with too much intelligence. You still can, she laughed once, without humor. Can I? He did not answer quickly. That was one thing she trusted about him. Elias did not rush comfort, just a quiet pain. She walked out like a person carrying a full bucket and refusing to spill it. I thought that was strength. Maybe it was. But maybe strength is also setting the bucket down before it breaks your hands. No man had ever spoken to her sorrow as if it had weight. Before dawn, hoofbeats came from the east, not Avery's men. Mrs. Beck from the boarding house rode in on a mule, her bonnet crooked, her face pinched with shame. She climbed down and approached Myra with a bundle. I found this under the loose stair by your room, Mrs. Beck said. They must have dropped it when they searched. Inside the bundle was a small ledger page, torn but not burned. At the bottom was Harlan Bell's handwriting, authorizing payment to Deputy Crass for night retrieval of disputed records. Mrs. Beck wrung her hands. I did not speak up yesterday. I was afraid they would close my house. My husband left debts. I thought silence was safer. Mara looked at the woman who had watched her grow from an orphaned girl to a courthouse clerk. Anger rose, then tiredness, then something colder and clearer. Silence is only safer until it reaches your own door, Mara said. Mrs. Beck lowered her eyes. I know. Mara took the paper. Thank you for bringing it. The older woman began to cry, but Mara did not have time to comfort her. Forgiveness could be real and still not gentle. They rode at sunrise. The prairie opened wide and gold around them. For the first hour, no one followed. Mara let herself feel the horse beneath her, the air in her lungs, the satchel against her hip. The road was faint but present, bending east where her father said it would, avoiding low ground, finding the honest path around stone and spring. Then gunshots cracked behind them. Han's horse reared. Elias swung back and saw riders cresting the hill. Grasped and two rode men, with Harlan behind them on a lathered horse. "Ride," Elias said. They ran. The old road dropped into a wash where rainwater had cut the earth deep. Elias knew the crossing, but Han did not. His horse stumbled on loose gravel and went down hard. Han rolled free, crying out as his ankle twisted beneath him. Mara pulled up at once. Elias shouted, "Mara!" She was already off her horse. Han tried to stand and could not. The riders behind them were closing. Elias looked at the north ridge, then at Han, then at Mara. A choice formed in his face. The kind men spend years claiming they are ready for. Then meet only once. He handed Mara the packet of evidence. "Take Moses," he said. "He's faster. Ride north. Don't stop until you reach the junction." "No, Mara, no. They need Han silent as much as me. If you stay, all of this dies in the wash. I leave him. Then everything I said at the courthouse was only words." Elias stared at her. Frustration, fear, and something deeper moved across his face. Then he nodded and drew his rifle from the saddle. "Get him behind that bank." They made their stand in the wash. Elias did not shoot to kill. He shot the ground before the lead horse, then a branch above Krask's head. The horses balked. The riders spread out along the ridge. Harlan called down, "This ends when she hands over the papers." Mara helped Han behind a clay bank and stood where Harlan could see her. "You mean the payment record with your signature?" she called. Even from that distance, she saw his posture change. Krask swore. Elias glanced at her. That was bold. It was also true. The standoff might have ended badly if the road had remained empty, but old roads remember more than wheels. They remember need. And that morning, Need came riding from the south and east. Joaquin appeared first with 6 ranch hands. Then Doc Hensley in a buggy. Then Mrs. Bex. Then Louis and 2 graders from Split Rock. Then homesteaders whose wells stood in the path of the false road. Behind them came Mr. Fong, driving a supply wagon with a dozen railroad workers walking alongside, each carrying a shovel, pick handle, or lantern pole. They filled the road, not with an army, with witnesses. Krask looked behind him and understood the odds had changed. Harlan still tried to hold his ground. "These people have no standing," Mara's voice carried clear in the wash. "They have names." Elias lowered his rifle. "And roads are made by the people who have to walk them." The words settled over the dust. Harlan turned his horse as if to retreat, but the southern road was blocked. Krask tried the ridge, but Joaquin's men were there. The 2 road men dropped their guns first. Harlan looked at Mara then, not with love, not even with regret, but with hatred for the fact that she had refused to stay small. "You have ruined yourself," he said. Mara stepped closer, the evidence held against her chest. "No, you mistook my quiet for permission." By noon, they reached Fort Laramie Junction together, a procession of wagons, horses, witnesses, and dust. Territorial Judge Crane had just stepped from the train when the road itself seemed to arrive before him, demanding to be heard. Judge Crane was not impressed by noise. That worked in Mara's favor. He was a lean man with silver hair and spectacles that sat low on his nose. He listened in a freight office beside the tracks while locomotives breathed steam outside and telegraph keys chattered in the next room. Pike Avery and Lyle Carver arrived an hour later, red-faced from hard riding and furious to find the matter beyond their courthouse walls. They came dressed for authority. Pike with his watch chain, Carver with his banker's coat, Harlan, with dust on his sleeves and fear behind his eyes. Mara came with mud on her skirt, a bruise darkening one wrist, and a satchel full of truth. This hearing was smaller than the one in Briar Crossing, but it felt larger. Not because more people watched, because this time, the people who watched had come to stand beside her. Han gave his testimony first. Mara translated his Cantonese into English. Every word careful, every pause honored. He explained the paper he had marked, believing it to be a wage receipt. Luis testified next in Spanish. Then Rafael, pale but upright in Doc Hensley's buggy outside the open freight door, swore that he had seen the ledger burned at Split Rock after refusing to sign another false statement. Mrs. Beck produced the torn payment order. Myra laid down the burned ledger strip, her father's survey notes, the false map, and the true route. Pike Avery called it confusion. Lyle Carver called it frontier disorder. Harlan Bell called it the work of an ambitious woman manipulating ignorant laborers. Judge Crane removed his spectacles and looked at him. "Mr. Bell," he said, "ignorance appears to have been used most heavily by the educated men in this matter." The room went very quiet. Then Judge Crane asked Mara to read her father's final note. Her hands trembled when she unfolded it. Elias stood near the back wall, hat in hand, saying nothing, but his presence steadied the room around her. Mara read, "If Cedar Road is ever proposed again, let the county be warned that the old name might be used to hide a new theft. The true road bends east of Ward Spring. The spring feeds not only 3 Lantern Ranch, but 3 homestead wells and the settlement ditch. No public good is served by making one man rich and 20 families dry." Her voice held until the last word. Judge Crane ordered the Cedar Road approval suspended. He ordered Pike Avery, Lyle Carver, Harlan Bell, and Deputy Crass held for formal inquiry into fraud, intimidation, destruction of public record, and conspiracy to seize land under false authority. The railroad marshal, who had been leaning by the telegraph desk with mild interest, suddenly became very interested indeed. Pike shouted that the judge had no right. Carver threatened to call every loan in Briar Crossing. Harlan said nothing. He only looked at Mara as the marshal took his pistol. She thought she would feel triumph. Instead, she felt the strange emptiness that comes after a storm passes and a person sees how much fence must be rebuilt. The return to Briar Crossing was slower. News traveled faster than wagons. By the time they reached town the next day, people had gathered along Main Street. Some watched from porches. Some pretended they had always doubted the accusations. Some had the decency to look ashamed. The courthouse doors stood open. Judge Whitcomb met Mara at the steps, his face lined deeper than before. Beside him stood Mrs. Truitt from the school board, the county clerk, and half the town that had listened while she was shamed. The judge removed his hat. "Miss Vale," he said, "this court owes you an apology." Mara stood at the foot of the steps where she had walked down alone 2 days earlier. She thought of all the replies she might have made. She thought of her mother bending over wash steam while women mispronounced her name. She thought of her father's maps. She thought of Tomas Serrano, still fevered but alive, whose words had nearly been stolen after a lifetime of honest work. "You owe more than me," Mara said. The judge bowed his head. "Yes, we do." Mrs. Truitt stepped forward, stiff with discomfort. "The school board would be honored to restore your appointment. A week earlier, those words would have opened the future again." Now Mara heard them with a changed heart. "I will teach," she said, "but not only school children. This town needs a public translation office independent of the court. Any man or woman asked to sign a paper in a language they cannot read will have the right to bring it there first." The county clerk shifted. "That is not how things have been done." Mara looked at the courthouse. "See, I know." Elias's mouth curved slightly at that. "The town council fought the idea for 3 meetings. then surrendered when Judge Crane's telegram arrived, recommending it as a condition of restoring public trust. The railroad offered a small room near the depot. Mrs. Beck donated a desk. Mr. Fong built shelves from packing crates. Joaquin hung a lantern over the door, saying every honest office needed a light. They called it the Roadhouse at first, because it stood where travelers came and went. But over time, people simply called it Maras. Winter edged in slowly. Frost whitened the pasture grass at Three Lantern Ranch. The false markers were pulled from the prairie, and the true cedar road was cleared by volunteers who worked with shovels, teams, and more argument than skill. The road bent east, as it always had, sparing the spring and the wells. Tomas Serrano recovered enough to sit by the stove and complain about everyone's coffee. Rafael stayed on at the ranch. On found steady work with the railroad and came to Mara twice a week to help others who spoke little English, but had plenty to say. Elias came to town often that winter. At first he brought papers for translation, then fence contracts, then letters that did not truly need reading. Once he brought a broken lantern from the ranch gate and asked if Mr. Fong knew a man who could mend it, though the blacksmith stood 2 doors away. Mara let him keep his excuses for a while. Their affection grew in small, visible acts. He waited outside her office on nights she worked late, not crowding her, simply there with his wagon lamp lit. She sent books to the ranch for Joaquin's niece and pretended it was part of community service. He built a railing by her depot steps after ice made them dangerous. She mended his coat and did not deny being angry with the torn cloth. One evening in early spring, when snowmelt ran in the ditches and the prairie smelled of thawing earth, Elias found Mara walking the true cedar road beyond town. The sun was low, casting long gold lines across the ruts. He walked beside her for a while without speaking. That was another thing she had come to love. Elias did not fear silence. He knew it could hold more than emptiness. At last he said, "I got a letter from Judge Crane about the road, about you." Mara stopped. "He says the territorial court wants certified translators, paid positions. Denver first, maybe Santa Fe after." The old dream stirred. A room, books, respect, a name printed cleanly on official paper. "That is good work," Elias said. "It is. You should take it if you want it." She looked down the road toward the ranch country, where the 3 lanterns would be lit by dusk. "And if I do not know what I want, then take your time knowing. No grasping, no wounded pride, no demand hidden inside tenderness." Mara felt her throat tighten. "Once, I thought a future was something someone approved for me. A clerkship, a board appointment, a marriage proposal spoken in the proper parlor. And now I think a future is a road. You choose it by walking." Elias smiled softly. "That sounds like your father." "It sounds like me." He nodded, accepting the correction. They walked on until the town was behind them, and the prairie opened wide. At the bend where the false road would have turned west toward spring, Elias stopped. "I won't ask you to make your life smaller to fit mine," he said. "I won't ask you to leave work that matters. I won't ask you to be grateful because I helped when helping was the only decent thing to do." Mara looked at him, the wind lifting loose strands of hair at her cheek. "What will you ask?" He took off his hat, suddenly less certain than she had ever seen him. "I'll ask if there might be a road that reaches both your door and mine." The question was plain. No courthouse performance, no polished lawyer's promise. Just a man standing on honest ground, offering companionship without taking her name from her. Mara thought of the day she had lost her future beneath the courthouse windows. She thought of the men who had shamed her, finding the road blocked not by revenge, but by every person whose voice they had tried to steal. She thought of silence, and how it had changed from a cage into a place where truth could gather strength. "Yes," she said, "there might be." He breathed out like a man who had been holding winter in his chest. She reached for his hand first. By summer, Cedar Road carried wagons safely east of the spring. Travelers stopped at the depot office before signing contracts. Children came after school to learn letters in English, Spanish, and Cantonese, laughing over sounds their parents had once been punished for speaking. The courthouse hired 2 translators, both paid from county funds and answerable to public record. Judge Whitcomb retired before anyone asked him to, which the town considered merciful. Pike Avery and Lyle Carver lost their offices, their claims, and much of their pride. Harlan Bell left Briar Crossing on a stage headed east, and for years afterward, whenever men spoke too smoothly in town, someone would say, "Careful, we know that road." Mara did not take the Denver Post. Not then. She sent a polite letter saying her work in Briar Crossing was unfinished, and for the first time in her life, declining approval felt like freedom. She and Elias married in autumn beneath the 3 lanterns at the ranch gate, not because he had rescued her, not because she needed his name repaired over hers. They married because love had been built the way good roads were built, measured carefully, cleared honestly, strengthened by labor, and tested by weather. Tomas Serrano sat in the front chair and cried openly. Joaquin pretended not to. Mrs. Brecht baked 3 cakes and threatened any man who touched them before supper. Mr. Fong hung paper lanterns from the porch beside the iron ones, and when dusk came, the whole yard glowed with warm, mingled light. After the vow, Mara and Elias walked a little way down Cedar Road, while the music rose behind them. The prairie wind moved softly through the grass. The road curved east where it should, away from greed, toward water, toward home. At the bend, Mara looked back. The courthouse was miles away, hidden beyond dust and distance. The shame that had once followed her from its steps no longer had a voice. Ahead, the 3 lanterns burned steady against the evening, lighting the road for anyone still finding their way. And beside her, Elias held her hand, as if it was not something he had won, but something he had been trusted to carry.